I'd love to turn the time over to Evis Garcia and Reed Ewing with the University of Utah City and Metropolitan Planning Department.
Well, thank you, Angela. So today we are going to be presenting a report that we created with PhD students and master students at the Metropolitan Research Center. And the title of that report is Affordable Housing Strategies, a State of the Practice in 10 Utah cities. The methodology was to look at plans, look at reports, look at websites, and see what these 10 cities are doing in terms of like creating affordability in their communities. And those 10 cities are Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake, Provo, West Valley City, Orem, Park City, Ogden, Sandy, West Jordan, and Lehi. And we actually will be like sharing these reports with everyone that is attending this webinar. So the report starts with some of the federal programs. So here we're talking about low-income housing tax credits, the new market tax credits, and the community investment tax credits, or CRA. But today we want to spend most of our time talking about more like local tools that are being used by these like cities in Utah. And we divided these tools in 3 categories. So financial, here we're talking about tax abatements and tax increment financing reimbursements. Then we have like policy or regulations. So a lot of like what Ted and Ari and Angela were talking about, more like planning tools, like reducing like parking requirements and things like that. And finally, just like social or other strategies. And this is more things that have to do, for example, with like how to battle not in my backyard movements.
Okay, thank you, Evis, and thank you all for attending. The chart you see has X's and checks. It's based on work our students did, mostly master's students at the University of Utah in City and Metropolitan Planning. A check means that a particular city uses a particular tool. An X means that city does not use that particular tool. As you can see, there are a lot of tools, and you're going to see 2 other slides like this that increase the number to over 20 ways of producing affordable housing. And I guess the main point, we're going to be talking about each of the tools on this particular slide, but I think the main point is that there are a lot of X's. And those are areas where we'd be kind of stretching a bit, but where we could do more to produce affordable housing in our state. And I think Ari's work, they talked about the fact that it is a public priority. Affordable housing or housing affordability means we probably want to and can do more.
So the first 2 is like waiving or reducing impact fees. So the impact fees that we are really talking about is to pay for parks and other infrastructure in cities. So if you build affordable housing at, let's say, 30%, 50%, 80% of the area median income, you pay for community service. So the idea is that you will be having a reduction in these fees according to like how deep you are offering affordability. The impact fees might also vary based on housing location. For example, urban infill developments might command a lower fee than developments that are built in the suburbs, and then you have to build all kinds of infrastructure that doesn't exist. There were like 4 of the cities that waive, reduce or reduce the impact fees, including Salt Lake City, Park City, Sandy, and South Salt Lake. For example, South Salt Lake's the 2010 general plan recommending waiving the park's impact fee if a developer of affordable housing decides to provide some open space that the residents can use in the development site.
Okay, the next tool or strategy is tax abatement. And you'll notice from this next slide that 0 of 10 cities in our survey are giving tax abatements right now. By that I mean providing an elimination or a reduction in property tax for affordable units. You think of tax abatement more in terms of economic development, that tax abatement is used to attract, for example, high-tech firms when you're competing with other cities around the country. It can also be used for affordable housing. And the examples we give in each of the chapters, there are the local examples, that is from the state of Utah, and then there are the national examples. And the example, a couple of examples we give in the national example category, since we don't have any local examples, is New York City, which has a robust program for multifamily buildings that are renovated or rehabilitated and follow specific affordable housing requirements. And we talk about how that program was implemented, how many units are being covered by it, and so on. The other example we give is Portland, Oregon, which has a tax incentive for rental home rehabilitation. It also supports construction of owner-occupied homes in certain opportunity areas and nonprofit ownership of affordable rental units. And in a single year, 14,000 homes received a tax abatement benefit.
The tax increment financing reimbursements or TIFs are a very popular mechanism for revitalizing blighted neighborhoods and just boosting economic development in that area, and thus generating future property taxes. So these like future or expected property taxes are diverted and used in the TIF district today. Usually it's an area that is designated as eligible for TIF funds when like the government intervention is really needed in that particular space. So usually this will be designated by trying to find out if the area qualifies for to be a community redevelopment area, and this is like stated by the federal government. So most TIFs usually don't use affordable housing, but like many cities are now trying to use it for affordable housing. And this here in Utah, we have like Salt Lake City, Provo, West Valley, Park City, Ogden, West Jordan, and Lehi. So they try to promote TIFs for affordable housing by setting aside an amount of like 10 to 20% of the TIF for housing projects that are affordable. So in Salt Lake City, the TIF is managed by the City Redevelopment Agency, or RDA, and TIFs could be transferable from one district to another. For example, in our research, at least like last we found out, the RDA designated the Northwest Quadrants as a community redevelopment area, and TIF is authorized, but as you may know, housing is not being built in that particular space. Yet some of those like funds that are created could be used for affordable housing in other places in the city, in this case at 10%.
Okay, next one is local rent supplement or assistance programs. Again, we have 0 out of 10. I don't know why I ended up getting the slides with 0 out of 10, but this is one where no one's doing it. We have federal subsidies, which are responsible for the majority of rental assistance programs nationally. Section 8, for example, often administered through local housing authorities. But what we're talking about here is where the local government itself provides for rental assistance for low-income families. It's particularly critical during periods of unemployment and other unexpected difficulties. The pandemic is a classic in that sense, a good example of where it'd be nice to have this particular tool. Our national example, or one of them, is Frederick County, Maryland, which has a rental allowance program, which provides rental assistance payments to low-income families during critical or emergency times. The assistance can last up to 6 months, and the goal of the program is to help during these transitional periods, supporting people moving back into a sense of self-sufficiency.
Home purchasing assistance programs provide interest-free or very low interest loans to qualify low to moderate income home buyers. And this is one of the most popular programs implemented in 8 out of the 10 cities, including Salt Lake City, Provo, West Valley, Park City, Ogden, Sandy, West Jordan, and Lehi. And to qualify, homeowners are often first-time homeowners, and they must intend to use the property as a primary residence, of course, and they must commit to living in the house for a period of time. Usually it's 2 years, and if they don't, they might have a penalty. And there are some cities that also provide zero interest loans that could be $10,000, for example, for a down payment for a first-time home buyer.
The next tool, and I'm going to return to what I said originally. This is research that was done by our students. They did interviews with local planners. They went through the moderate income housing elements and so on. And it's possible we got some of these wrong. I think we found a few discrepancies in the last 24 hours. So our apologies if we did. We made a big effort, the students did, to get good information. So preservation of long-term affordable housing rehabilitation programs, often given by cities in the form of a loan to a homeowner that may not be able to pay for repairs, maintenance, upkeep. They can be used for everything from plumbing repair to increasing energy efficiency of units. All cities in Utah, except Orem, according to our survey, apply programs of this sort. Salt Lake City purchases existing multifamily structures, such as hotels, motels, or apartment complexes, and redevelops those units as affordable housing while operating structural renovation programs to reduce utility, energy, and maintenance costs. Lehi encourages upkeep of existing housing stock through several policies, including utilization of state and federal funds or tax incentives, and is part of its moderate income housing element. Park City, 122 units were rehabilitated and upgraded using gap loans from the city. Our national example is Prince George's County in Maryland, which operates a single-family housing rehabilitation loan program that provides financing to low-income individuals to upgrade aging and substandard homes.
And I wanted to mention, there was like a question in the chat about like mobile home parks and how the affordability was like being lost. And Reed was mentioning the housing trust funds could be really good for actually like transforming motels and hotels. So there's a lot of research of like how also actually like the city could buy from the mobile home park owner that property. And sometimes they might use like eminent domain to do that, but housing trust funds are really good for that kind of development. So actually, like before moving to Utah, I was in Chicago and did an extensive evaluation of the Chicago Housing Trust Funds. There I learned that like housing trust funds are very flexible, so they can be implemented at any scale, from cities to states, and they can provide low-cost loans for brand new units or rehabs. They can also provide direct subsidies to tenants. So similar to the Housing Choice Voucher or the Rapid Rehousing Program for homeless individuals. You can have like participating landlords that only have one unit, really helping them to avoid foreclosures if they have like, for example, 2 units in where they live. They can be like funded in very flexible ways. So with like property taxes, cigarette taxes, taxes for gas or boats. And as I said, they could be used for homeowners, renters, and also homeless individuals. Here in Utah, we have a housing trust fund. It's called the Olin Walker Housing Loan Fund. And it like serve families at the 40% of the area median income. And the same year, it rehab like 800 multifamily units and also like 85 single family homes. Salt Lake City has a housing trust fund that has been around since like 2000. And it provides like loans to housing sponsors and developers for affordable and special needs housing in Salt Lake City. So it provides ownership units through the Mountain Lands Community Housing Trust, and also for Habitat for Humanity in Park City specifically. And in Park City also there's a housing resolution, housing obligations units. And these are privately financed and have produced both like long-term renters, but also like owner-occupied units. And there's like several cities that are thinking about creating a housing trust fund. Lehi is one of them, but they haven't finalized any kind of agreement.
Okay, I think we're watching the time here. We're probably going to have to speed it up a little bit. So I'll see if I can go through mine a little faster. So the community land trusts are the next tool. 2 of 10 cities that we surveyed have these land trusts to retain land that is set aside for affordable housing. The land bought by the trust is kept affordable and sheltered from rising land prices in the market. Qualified low-income homeowners own title to the house, but typically have a renewable long-term ground lease for the land, and that's how the city keeps the cost of housing down by not allowing appreciation of the land. Salt Lake City has a community land trust. Utah County is in the process, we were told in our survey, of setting one up like the one in Provo. Chapel Hill is one of our national examples. Burlington, Vermont, another one. Durham, North Carolina, and Albuquerque. And by the way, I haven't said this, but when you go to the manual, the Affordable Housing Manual or guide, there are lots of references, and these references will allow you to look into the individual tools in much greater detail than we can.
So the next tools are policy tools. So these are more planning tools, such as updating the zoning code and FormBased codes.
Yeah, so upzoning is done in, as you'd expect, in all 10 out of 10 cities at some point or another, in some place or another. It doesn't always lead to affordable housing, as you all know. The units along 400 South, for example, aren't particularly affordable. They're certainly not affordable for low-income households. So it's not a guarantee, but it at least creates the possibility of greater affordability, because the cost of land is amortized over more units when an upzoning occurs. I would love to talk about Provo and Orem using student and senior housing zoning overlays to create more affordable housing. I'm going to, though, skip to the national example, which is one that I know you're all familiar with and just fascinating. Minneapolis just passed a comprehensive plan amendment, which rezones all single-family housing properties for up to triplexes. So in theory, tripling the density ultimately of a single-family neighborhood. Politically, obviously, a tough thing to do, but it's impressive nonetheless.
Form-based codes, they differ from traditional zoning in that they focus on the form of development over the use of land. So the form is decided in the context of the overall look and feel of the community. So these codes stipulate standards for design elements, including but not limited to facades, the relationship of one building to another building, and the scale of buildings and blocks. So usually form-based codes are used in areas where they might be close to transit or where there's density. So this is a way to encourage more affordable housing, thinking that how like communities can grow in a smart manner. And the city of South Salt Lake passed form-based codes in their East Streetcar neighborhood in 2014. And as a result of the change, there was several multifamily housing units that have been developed along the corridor with a mix of like market rate and some affordable housing units. And Park City and Salt Lake City have also implemented form-based codes in selected areas as well.
Yeah, thank you. So inclusionary zoning is sort of my favorite tool. I was, before I came out here in the East, where it's much more common. It requires developers to build a certain percentage of affordable housing in their market rate projects. So you have mixed income, affordable, and market rate in the same project. It usually requires something between 10 and 20% of the units to be affordable. It's often combined with other things like density bonuses. So yes, the developer has to provide some affordable housing, but ultimately gets to build more because of a density bonus. Park City, and I hope we're right about this, is the only municipality in our study to have inclusionary zoning. From 2005 to 2011, 78 affordable housing units were built in response to this requirement. Our national examples, one of them, one's New York, it's 20% affordable is sort of standard. Was the requirement in the original program. One that I'm much more familiar with is Montgomery County, Maryland, because I was at the University of Maryland before I moved out here, and actually saw these units. They are almost under the moderately priced dwelling unit program. They're almost indistinguishable from the market rate units. Not 100%, but very small differences in the same housing cluster. And they've had it since 1973. They've had this program, and they've produced over 12,000 affordable units.
So Rita talked about density bonuses. So an example that he was giving of inclusionary zoning, for example, if I'm asking you as a developer to make 20% of the units affordable, if you, for example, were only allowed, as in the normal zoning, to build 35 units, maybe now with this density bonus, you can build additional 10 units and have like 45 units. So there's like 6 cities that allow density bonus, Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake, Orem, Park City, Ogden, and Lehi. And I found a very nice example in Lehi of these homes that were called the Beehive homes. And this was a very small project. So they were allowed to build 8 units, or they in the normal zoning, but then with the density bonus, they were allowed to build 16 units, and they are for older adults. So that was a very nice project to find.
So this one may strike you as a little odd or different, but reducing parking requirements is an affordable housing program. You all know from conferences and things you've read that structured parking is really expensive. I've seen numbers ranging up to $50,000 per structured parking space. It's usually between 20 and 30. So that's a cost that is necessarily passed on to renters, and it makes housing less affordable. For example, in San Francisco, one of the projects we highlight would have been required to build 130 to 190 parking spaces, but constructed only 85 spaces. And that represents, of course, a savings. That was right next to high quality public transit. One thing we've done a lot of, and I think Ted Knowlton has supported our work in this, is looking at TODs, transit-oriented developments around the country. And we've looked at now 7 of them, done detailed studies, case studies, and they typically, with unbundled parking, they typically require about 1 space per unit. And in contrast to the localities in this region that almost always require 2 spaces per unit. And that's obviously an added cost, and it thwarts affordability.
The next strategy is like preserving existing deed restrictions in affordable housing. So there's like 6 of 10 cities that use this strategy: Salt Lake City, Provo, Park City, Sandy, West Jordan, and Lehi. And these like deed restrictions are usually related to community land trusts or co-ops. So to avoid that the units are sold at the market rate, the local housing agency or maybe the nonprofit that is like managing the co-op or community land trust is given the right to oversee like the transaction that is happening between the one that sells and buys. And there's like a new buyback and sale program that was created by Park City Council in 2017. And the city holds a first right to purchase on all deed restricted properties. And the city has begun to exercise this right by purchasing properties with outdated deed restrictions, updating the deed restrictions, and then selling them to qualified buyers. And as Reed previously discussed, Salt Lake City has a community land trust, and Provo is in the process of funding one, so it'll be important to preserve these deed restrictions.
So we're running out of time, and Angela, how would you like us to handle this? Everyone's going to get the guide. We could just go very quickly through the remaining tools, maybe just mention them and add a sentence to it, or we could stop at this point and assume everyone's going to have a chance to read it. What would you like to do?
Why don't you quickly go through the slides with maybe a sentence, and then maybe we can keep panelists on for a few extra minutes to just answer a few of the questions that have come in, if that works for you guys.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So real quickly, create accessory dwelling units. It's one of the oldest, simplest ideas. Just allow granny flats and mother-in-law units above garages and separate backyard houses. In theory, doubles the density of a neighborhood that allows it. I believe 7 of 10 of the places we surveyed allow ADUs. So we talk about Salt Lake City's program and Sandy's program. I'm not going to talk about that, but we'll say that Santa Cruz, California revised its zoning ordinance in 2002 to allow accessory units everywhere, and did something that is different, which is why I'm bringing it up. They created a loan program for loans of up to $100,000 at a low interest rate for any homeowner who wants to create an accessory dwelling unit.
So we all know that time is money. So if you can fast track a construction permit for an affordable housing developer, that's a great idea. There's the South Salt Lake City and Provo and Salt Lake City offers this like permitting system. I wanted to mention that in Salt Lake City, there's a transit station area design guidelines, and it is based also on 100 points that you have to get, and you get 60 points towards the fast tracking if you provide some kind of affordable housing.
Okay, so the next slide is just one of those table slides. And remember that a check means a local government has a tool, and an X means it doesn't. And once again, there are a lot of X's. We're referring to this as social or other tools, which is a little funny, but we couldn't think of a better way to describe it.
So one of those other tools is the employer assisted housing, which is practiced in Salt Lake City, Provo, and also like Park City. And so I think Ari was talking about like how you can maintain, for example, teachers in your community. So the Park City, actually, the city itself wants to keep the teachers within the boundaries of Park City. And as you know, Park City is very expensive. So it actually like provides assistance in down payments and other types of assistance, so teachers can become homeowners within the district.
So the next one is public-private partnerships, and 6 of the 10 cities reported that they have these partnerships with private parties. There are good examples in Salt Lake. We, for example, highlight the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake, which approved $3.2 million for the Housing Assistance Management Enterprise company to purchase and develop 4 parcels on the 1700 South Block of State Street. The national examples, Austin, really cool energy efficient homes that have been built through a partnership. Charlotte, Mecklenburg is another example we give in the separate section for national examples.
The next strategy is like how to transform not in my backyard movement into like yes in my backyard, and that happens like through a lot of education. Like for example, the Utah Housing Coalition putting these kinds of events and many others to educate the public about the importance of affordable housing. And we found like 4 cities that are really good at this: Salt Lake City, Orem, Ogden, and Park City. And you can find more detailed examples in the report.
So city public housing, cities, 3 out of 10 own housing. And what we're not referring to here is necessarily federal public subsidized housing with a housing authority administering the housing, but where the local government actually owns housing. We have 3 examples of that. And I'm not quite sure about the 3 if they're like this, but Provo has the Provo City Housing Authority, and we talk about its output since 1981 when it was created. The rents are 30% of gross adjusted household income, and that is what makes it affordable.
So Ari and Ted were talking about the importance of thinking about housing and transportation. So usually you will pay like 30% towards like housing and about 20% of transportation. But if you live in a place that is like transit rich, you can really reduce those transportation costs. And so this like housing plus transportation way of thinking, it can be very helpful for policymakers. Like it's being used in Salt Lake City, Salt Lake, Provo, Ogden, Sandy, and Lehi to add more density where transit is located. But also it could be a great tool for consumers and people to make decisions about where they live.
So we're doing a study right now of the affordability of TOD around the country. And the H plus T framework is what we're using. So housing cost is affordable if it's less than 30% of income. Transportation considered affordable if it's less than 15%. And these TODs we're finding, and this will end our presentation, are pricey, not in terms of transportation. The transportation costs are low, and people own fewer automobiles than typical in the United States and so on. But the housing is typically for moderate income households, not for low income. So that's why it's so important to have inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning. And the last thing I'm going to say before I turn it back to Angela is just that I mentioned before that the references are throughout this report. They're almost all online. If you want to learn more about these, just go to the references and learn about what's happening around the country. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you guys so much. What a great report from the City and Metropolitan Planning Department. And thank you so much for sharing your work with us today.